a statewide kind of perspective of biosafety. And while I'm doing that, kind of going to get some information on some ongoing things or emerging things that you've probably heard about, particularly like 2 or 3. And a little bit of follow-up on the Ebola testing we did this past winter. That wasn't it. Let me hit the cancel and we shall go from there. There. Okay. Try it again. Okay, we gotta get him to advance here. Oh.
Obviously, I need to practice with my teenagers some more. There you go.
Okay.
Now we'll try it.
There we go.
Okay, can I back it up one slide the other direction or this one? Okay, let's see, previous. There we go, jumped over one. There we go. Okay.
Well, one thing in the laboratories, whether it be a public health or a hospital or a doctor's office or veterinarian's office, because we have contact with all these folks, is really when you have biosafety issues. There's so many different things going on. And as I think we've heard a little bit earlier, there are different kinds of organisms and they have different requirements. And so it's important to do some kind of a risk assessment prior to doing your SOPs or training or getting yourself ready to perform that type of testing.
And there's hazardous characteristics of both existing or the routine endemic organisms and also the emerging organisms or infectious agents we've got out there.
And really, after you determine what your risk levels are, what you're going to be working with, then you need to find out, well, how are you going to mitigate that?
What kind of safety protocols, training, follow-up? How do you document that people have been trained properly? Or if you have an incident, how do you report that? How do you document that? Those are all important parts of that mitigation strategy. Safety procedures can be developed from performing risk assessments, as I mentioned. And again, that can be on existing and emerging infectious agents,
not just the ones that you have all the time. And if you anticipate something that's national, like we saw with Ebola, and we heard with Phyllis earlier, it's good to go ahead in your facility to start developing and talking and planning as far as what would happen and what kind of things are you prepared to test for, what can you handle,
and what are the safety things that you can do to protect yourself here. And so I'm going to kind of go a little bit over that today, what we do at the state level.
And there's such a variety out there, and I've just listed a few today.
We have it on the foodborne side, and these are things we see every day and throughout the year. E. coli, Listeria, Campi, Salmonella, noroviruses. We see the vector-borne, and they're particularly an issue this year in Colorado. Francisella tularensis, Yersinia pestis, hantavirus, West Nile virus. We got them all going right now.
In fact, we're on a record level. I'll kind of talk about it a little bit later. And then going with rabies virus, we have
animals. It used to be, it was primarily the bats and some of the things that they come in contact with. But the last 4 or 5 years, we've had an increased level of skunk rabies. And that's a lot different. With the bats in the fall, in the winter, they migrate or they hibernate. You really don't have too many additional cases. But the skunks are out all year. And so we're seeing issues with them and also with a wider variety of animals that they come in contact. We've had cases where law enforcement reported one where they had to shoot a deer near Franktown because it was chasing a car for a mile down the road. They finally shot it, and when they tested, it was rabbit. We had a woman in southeast Colorado, a year previous to that, was sitting on her porch. She was like 89 years old. And this guy jumped the fence and started attacking her. She called out to her husband, who was 94 years old. Honey, he said, just wait a minute, I'll get the guy who shot it off the top. She survived, actually. But the vitamin was extremely rapid. So we're seeing all types of things out there. And it's the seasonal, because as we go into fall, we're going to see influenza and the respiratory viruses. And what version of influenza virus are we going to get? Are we going to get something like avian influenza? With the problems what they're having with the chickens. One of the things they're monitoring in those areas where they're having that is monitoring the people that are actually working with those flocks, because they will have intense indoor flocks for the most part. And we know that particularly in Asia, Southeast Asia, they have had, that's how it generally takes it, with a really prolonged, intense contact with the poultry, there's more likelihood that you're going to contract it and come down with it. And then we have our imports that are
any time. It can be Brucella because people don't go out of the country, students, visitors, tourists. sample the food or bring some back with them, is unpasteurized coming with Rousseau. Burkholderia, we haven't had Burkholderia for years. We had 2 in 1 year. They usually say Southeast Asia because of Vietnam. One was a young woman who went down to North and South America for ecotourism and came down with it. The other was a young man in his 20s who was a construction worker in Mexico along the coastline. So neither one of those was the typical place that we expected.
Usually it's in Southeast Asia in the past, and we're getting those as well. Because of travel, how easy it is to travel, we found out with Ebola, dengue, any of these things are within 24 hours of getting into our particular communities. And we're not talking about just gateway cities, but virtually anywhere in this country, in this continent. So as a state laboratory, we have statewide biosafety issues, and we are one part in the laboratory of a larger system, not only nationally, but even on a statewide basis. Our laboratory is primarily a reference laboratory. Specimens come from our hospitals or our clinics or local health departments, and we will actually make the confirmation. In the case of some things like the slidages or hearing plague and tularemia, the local laboratories at the hospitals are what we call doing sentinel work. They can either rule it out with some simple tests that the ASM has developed in conjunction with the CDC. If they can't do that, then they refer it. And that's where it comes to a reference laboratory. And we are a reference laboratory for the state of Colorado. We do have some others in our LRN laboratories, including one in El Paso County, Pueblo, and up at Fort Collins, both at the CDC itself and at the CSU campus with their veterinary school. But as far as any of the cases that would be coming in as far as bioterrorism, that would all come to our laboratory. And we get those, and we get them at all hours. Believe me, sometimes we get in and out of there at midnight. But historical numbers of human cases of plague, I just kind of touched on that a little earlier.
Average in the United States is about 7 to 8 human cases of plague in a year. Last year, we had 7 cases in Colorado alone. This year, we already have 4 human cases. We hadn't previously had a fatal case since 11 years ago, and we already within a month and a half, we've had 2 fatals. One around the foothills north of Fort Collins, and the other one down by Pueblo, which you heard about. And we have tested those specimens. What's interesting this year is that they have been septicemic plague. The most recent case was a person who I heard from what passed over me was that there was a very slight fever. Again, it's not bubonic, so you don't have the buboes. Traditionally, we see a lot of bubonic plague. Last year, we had a rare case of bubonic, septicemic, and pneumonic. We had 4 people, a dog, and a cat in the same cluster out in Adams County, which was extremely rare. And thought was that there was actually some person-to-person transmission in that case, even dog-to-person transmission with that one, which is exceedingly unusual. It's making all the journals in this case here. So it's important that we have not only able to do the testing safely ourselves, but also when we make a call out that it's been confirmed to one of these hospitals that submitted to us, or one of the laboratories, that they have followed proper procedures and haven't exposed themselves. Because tularemia, for example, is one of the, I think it's the 3rd most commonly acquired, laboratory-acquired infection. Brucella is number 1, I think Q fever is number 2. These are all select agents. You actually have as high a risk really as a laboratorian working with some of these cultures that are suspect as if you are out in the community, because you're getting more suspected materials coming into you. With this, we've had an increase in laboratory exposures. When we get one of these, we confirm one of the responsibilities we have as our part of the select agent programs. We have to call whoever submitted the specimen to us. And one of the things they have to do once we confirm is they also have to fill out a particular form that I'll talk about a little later, just briefly. But the other thing I do is I have to ask them, has there been any exposure? Did you work with them outside of containment? In the case of the pneumonic plague, just where the 1 patient was put in, they had over 100 cases of exposure because the person had not been put in isolation without a mask on, was coughing blood for several days. And the wife came down with it, and so as a result of that, many people in that area, they put them on either feeder watcher, depending on the case of it, they would possibly do a prophylactic antibiotics on it. And it continues. I think we had close to 200 last year exposures within labs just for select agents. And we're not even talking about some of the other things that are infectious. So it's very important, and I'll kind of go over this, that we try to work with the laboratories to show them that you can work safely with this. And particularly in times like this,
anything that comes through the door potentially could be something serious. You can't just work out on the bench and assume that it's going to be safe to do that. One of the other problems that we have is that the specimens, to be able to do a proper testing, it has to be properly packaged, as we see today, and it also has to be labeled and documented. During this time, in fact, the one that outbreak we talked about with the pneumotic cases, one of the patient specimens, one day came in and they said something. I had a brown lunch bag with a biohazard sticker on it, and I had 2 blood tubes in it, not cushioned, but just sitting in the bag. I won't even tell the report in which laboratory. It's one of the better hospitals we have in the state. Somehow it gotten through send-outs. And the only reason I could tell is that I had a little bit of labeling I could make out. I could tell a patient was familiar, and I called the hospital, and how did that get out? It's supposed to go for the other type of testing. Extremely important. Even if it is proper package, the labeling is extremely important, because you can imagine right now, we're getting several specimens a week, if not even the same day. In fact, we confirmed a plague and a tularemia yesterday on the same day, human cases. And so we want to be sure the testing we do, the results we get out are for the right person. We don't want to have to guess on this. We just simply get a bag. Also, if we have a requisition slip that we have for the things that are sent to us, we know more of the patient background, what we should be doing, who sent it, who the contact is, if we have a question or if we have results to report out. And also any special things that they may want us to test. You know, they may indicate some of the testing they've done previously. So that's one of the things we really work on when we get these specimens, to go back and reach back out and to work with these folks and to be sure for their safety. And also, you can imagine if we had this blood, and it was for one of the patients we knew had plague, if those 2 tubes had broken, either the curry or anything else with this blood laying around. So it's very, very important. Another thing is the use of automated systems. We had a tularemia case on the West Slope just last week. This was actually 2 weeks ago. It was a 10-month-old we had. And in this case, the hospital, though, had a relatively small hospital lab, as you can imagine, some of the smaller facilities. And I asked them when I reported it out, if we had any exposure. Oh, yeah, we did. And then I didn't even ask it, but then they asked kind of meekly, is it a problem if we smell plates? Now, tularemia is really easy to get. And it only takes between 1 and 10 bacteria. And folks that get a chance to look at them, if you can make them out, they're one of the smallest bacteria out there. So they're basically their whole lab staff that day, which I think was like 3 people, end up going on prophylactic antibiotics when I called back and said, no, we confirmed it. So, yes.
So how do you deal with, you know, we have automated systems like blood chemistry and things like that you have to do. What do you do, precautions you take when they can't be inside labs and have
Right. You know, it's not as bad, because we know sometimes you're not going to know what's coming in for the initial specimen. But once you get a culture, don't run that culture material through there, because now you've concentrated it. And if you suspect anything, some of the things, you know, that's a big issue, because those people will create those aerosols. The other thing that we're seeing is cases where people are doing the catalase test, which is a good indicator. Now, both plague and tularemia, the little organism, Yersinia pestis for plague and Francisella tularensis for tularemia, will get aerosolized very easily, and they both are catalase positive. Now, tularemia, it's not as much, but it depends on how much of a quantity you may put on there. You can get pretty busy, and so you're aerosolizing in your space. People, if they are still doing slide fixing, if they're doing it one at a time and not using an automated system, just making a gram slide of that, people get exposed with it.
But what about when you have the machines that do the automated stuff, what kind of PPE and what kind of, do you use bubbles or anything like that?
You know, it depends on the individual and how they have it set up, and that's one thing we really haven't seen with the weather. We don't use those for most of ours, other than DNA work, which has already been killed off by the time we look at it on those. But for those systems, yeah, I'd say it would be very good to have at least some respiratory protection and eye protection, certainly with gloves on it, some kind of disposable gloves with it. The other thing that I'll talk about a little bit later in some of these automated systems, and some of these, they are not very accurate, and they'll lead you down the wrong road. Some of these will say that it's a Acinetobacter, or it'll be some other thing, Haemophilus influenza or some other thing, where it goes to its closest organism. It isn't expecting that it's going to be a select agent or even something other than that. That's less common.
So it'll go to what it is. So a lot of times they can be misassigned. And from a patient's point of view, that's really bad because it's delaying theirs. We see that with Burkle-Berry cases, sometimes with Brucella even, that they get misassigned and it really delays the testing on them. And another thing is people are taking too much. I know when I talked to somebody next to me the other day called me and said, what about the multi-cost systems? The ones that are more of a chemical based, some of the people that are selling those things, well, you can identify everything. You gotta hope they don't. For one thing, a couple things. Number one, the LRN at CDC does not recognize that as a confirmation test. It still has to go to an LRN laboratory for confirmation using those methods. Secondly, if you really want to go into confirmation, you want to be a select agent program laboratory. If you start doing that, you have all the hoops you have to jump through at that point, and we certainly do. So it's a good adjunct, it will tell you, but it's not going to. At this point, it's not accepted as a confirmation test. But, you're doing all this other, and it's a little more accurate than some of the early versions.
So we've had people that come to us and ask us about these automated systems, they are asking us. And it's kind of like, because if you're working in a laboratory, you don't always know. Sometimes people don't tell you always.
Right. Well, you don't know what's coming in.
Yeah,
because that's why you're testing. You don't know what's happening. And that's a problem.
Larry, are you seeing more clinical labs doing more of the work in biosafety cabinets and less on the bench? Because clinical labs persist in getting the LAAs where the research labs incidence is going down.
It goes in phases. Now we do the simple workshops and that seems to have it. That helps, but then you have turnover, and I'll mention that a little bit later, and then you start going back up again. And like the things like the plate. I just think about that. Who's plates these things. I didn't even ask for that one. They say, well, it's okay. These type of plates. Different types of things that are done. I think they're not doing pipe hitting or anything these days, but you still can't rule that out. So you just don't know what's happening. But we did see it. We're seeing virtually, I'd say over half the time that I'm reporting them when I call back out on these that we're getting just on the select agent. And we're not talking about everything else even. That they've had exposures, they worked it on the bench. And there seems to be a thing that, well, it's okay, we don't think it's supposed to be this, it's supposed to be staph or strep. One of the cases, in fact, the teenager that died up at Grandfather's Lake, the 15-year-old that died on the day after his birthday. He'd gone to a Rockies game the night before for his birthday. And he was dying coughing on his way to the ambulance the next day, and was septicemic. But in that case, the people just, when they send these specimens in, they're just a question of, well, what are you doing? How are you testing these things? And it's a big issue. And we've had people, before even I first asked the question, oh, yeah, we got an exposure. And it's like,
who's they? The hospital?
This would be the clinic, the laboratories working in basically the microbiology laboratories. These are the people that are doing those tests that we're talking about right now.
At the hospital?
At the hospital. I've seen them at the hospital, some local health departments. When we had the case of the dog with the pneumonic cluster, the dog had died, which is rare for plague, it was pneumonic. They had actually buried the dog, they dug the dog up and took it to a local veterinary school laboratory, and you're suspecting anyway, they still had exposures while they did the necropsy. So I thought, well, you're thinking about it. Let's do something about it, And this dog had it all through the lungs. And didn't have any buboes, so it definitely was a pneumonic case here.
Was that a different strain?
They're still working on it. We work really closely with the CDC up at Fort Collins. In fact, any human cases and some interesting ones, if they're related to a case, we actually send them up to Fort Collins. We're in state, so we can still do that right now. And they do get the types of it. Our EPIs check with them. There's two different kinds of tularemia. Usually there's the one that's more in the eastern United States. It's a little more serious. We are seeing two types of that this year. In fact, we've had already this year, we've had a fatal case of tularemia, which we haven't had for years. We've had 2 human cases so far on plague, both of them septicemic, where you get a fever in a day or 2, you're dead. And we've had 4 cases of hantavirus, which is higher. The first 4 were all fatals. The last 2 we did, they are still alive. But it has really ticked up. We think it's weather related. But that's why people should be particularly on guard. Anything that's coming into your laboratory. My concern is, and maybe it's just my thought, but as we get closer to the fall and the flu season starts, how do you know it's flu and not
septicemic plague that you're dealing with. And certainly if not for yourself, for the patient's sake, that they get the appropriate treatment. So as you start getting into change of seasons, and this is still going around, it brings you even more concerned as a laboratorian that, universal precautions. So the other thing, as I mentioned earlier, a little more fully, is packing and shipping.
Whether it's your own courier, or it's our statewide courier, FedEx, well, then we can take it, but particularly on your own couriers and the local ones that are coming in, really be sure the send outs are following it properly and getting them bagged and getting them labeled so we know what's coming in. And for heaven's sake, if the bottle gets dropped, it's not going to splatter all, and you're going to have to deal with some kind of inspection to try to explain, well, why did you have to pack properly?
Why isn't DOT getting after that?
Well, we had our DOT inspection about a year and a half ago.
And one thing we had is we had a problem. We didn't get any fines out of it, but they were concerned because we don't do research. We test it and either get rid of it or transfer it up there. But we had some people in our receiving area that were one filled in while the other was gone, that was certified to accept the specimen or send it out or sign it to go out. Signature, not even handling it. And that was a problem. So as a result of that, we had to get everybody that could possibly doing that, get them all enrolled and send them through that class. Now they have to do their annual refresher courses and have that all signed out. It's also important that if we have any category A's, we have to have a list of people posted in our dock area so that the people that are receiving can contact one of us, usually select agent program approved, SRA approved, so that we can check it out. Now we can't accept tier 1 agents because we're not a tier 1. One of the things we didn't want to do is go through all Big Brother because we aren't doing any research. So we either destroy it or we're not going to keep it because there's so much involved with that. We got everything else going on. The key to it that we're trying to get across to everybody, it's been around for years, it's universal safety precautions. If you treat everything like it might be something and operate and have the proper PPE, chances are you're going to do pretty well. So never discount the biosafety risk of the unknown specimens. That's why they're testing it. They don't know what it is. So how do you know what you got is going to be safe? You don't. And as we're seeing increasingly this year, it isn't. You want to use the appropriate PPE and the safe working practices, and that's agent specific. What's good for one organism, you may be able to use just a regular button-up lab coat and gloves, but if you're dealing with a potential select agent, you have containment, you have wraparound, seamless gowns, and the whole bit. It's different. So that's why it's important to have agent-specific training for the things that you may be working with. And you also use to contain your materials, use your biosafety cabinets properly, and we heard that before lunch here. I just put this on, we want to be a safe seller here. It's actually the president of the Hanson office, so I don't want to pick on anybody's names here. But depending what you have, now this is select agent, this is what you would do, or an N95 respirator. But in some cases, you may not need to do an N95 respirator, it's a different case, but they're protected. And a dangerous garland out there, it's asking for it. No eye protection, respiratory, just playing down, you got stuff all over the safety cabinet blocking it, so it's going to have nice uninfected fingers. Okay? That's about all you can say. You got stuff on the hands, skipping over, you got all the other stuff. I'm not picking on these names. Peter and I have been doing for our own refresher course, our own safety. I'm lackadaisical Larry when I post for these things. So I can take as much as a dish out on this. But it's very important for safety's sake for documentation on it. You want people to know all the way down the line what you possibly have or what you do have, so that maybe they will handle it a little better, and that they will package it more properly. Again, you want it properly for safety's sake. Requisition forms. Again, we want to know what this might be and what we're testing it for, and who we report it to. Without a question, we don't have your name on the specimen. How do we know? No. Shipping documents, as we heard today, the DOT. Very important to have the proper shipping documents. Even if you don't send it with FedEx, you still have to have those requisition forms. Those have to be signed. I know about the WA materials because Peter and I helped package some from one of our facilities in Colorado that did get some of those. And actually, it came to us and we packaged it off and went. But so I think we're quite about what's going on with some of these things. Appropriate packaging labels. It is appropriate for the category of the organism that you're sending. Again, that's a whole pack and ship. But we work with that. And that is available, by the way, on the CDC site. We actually have an online training site that
Again, you have to do it every 3 years for category shipping. You have to pass the test and print out your certificate and hold it. But it is available, and you don't have to pay for somebody to come in if that's an issue. We also heard this morning, keep the maintenance records of your safety equipment, not only your biosafety cabinets, chemical fume hoods, but your cappers. Be sure you have batteries and everything that you check, be sure they're working properly. We've had problems with CDC in their labs where some of their, when they're working DSL-4s, for some of their space suits were had leaks out. And we don't go to that extent, but be sure the things that you have work, that you have the proper items there. And also maintain reports. You need to get past that, and you need to emphasize with your people that if you have an accident, don't feel embarrassed. It's for everybody's good that you report it. That's the first thing. And if anybody needs to have any medical care or observation, we'll do that. But just as important as that is also report any near hit reports. Because if something, well, I almost had this, well, that means there may be something going on that needs to be addressed. You don't just discard it because, well, we didn't have any problem. We'll just let it pass. No, you need to document that, and you need to periodically review that. This is federal paperwork, as you can tell. This is what I have to fill out, or at least send out for each one of these that we get for a select agent. This is just one example. It's just a select agent one. If we confirm a select agent, we have to fill out what we were the one page that says we're the lab that confirmed it. But every lab down the line that had it at one point has to fill these out as a submitter. For instance, the most recent case of plague, and this is the second one this year, it first was worked up and received and the testing done in a hospital laboratory. They in turn send it to the county health department laboratory, who sent it to us. So when I get a call back, I have to go back to both of these and ask them, you need to fill that out. The other one, which I hope we don't have to fill out, but we're doing more than we should, are the Form 3s. If it's opened up outside of containment, that's considered exposure. No questions asked about a select agent program. You've got to fill that out. You need to work with your health and safety officers within your facility, and our epidemiologists, the health department will also work with it, but they have to have that form. Now you can get that on the CDC's or select agent program line, but usually I just send it electronically to the people that I've reported to. Impact of the FedEx policy on shipping select agents and toxins. It depends on what you're doing. And I actually had a pretty good conversation with our cohorts up at CDC Fort Collins 2 days ago. They are having problems. World Courier does not have an inspector at DI, at least as of a couple days ago, to inspect the packages, which is required by the DOT. So when the CDC had to send something to Atlanta, they could not send it out of DI. They had to have World Courier drive it from Fort Collins all the way to Salt Lake City, where they did have one. Then they shipped it out. That cost them several $1,000s for one ship, but it's going great once.
I'll do it.
Yeah, that's a road trip one. What we're finding is now for the hospitals that are sending specimens to us, it's still a diagnostic specimen. It hasn't been confirmed. And for category, if it's suspicious and it isn't select agent, it's not been confirmed, that can still go with FedEx and whatever. But for us, if we get a confirmation on select agent, particularly like a plague or tularemia, they like it up at Fort Collins at the CDC because that's what they specialize in. And they try to make it over the country and see what strains, and they'll take it down to strains and subtypes and everything else. We used to be able to do the FedEx and just to drive it. We can't do that anymore. We have our own courier. There's some coming in question now. They haven't said anything yet, but that may not be an issue. Now, Fort Collins is actually willing to drive down and pick them up from us. And unfortunately, we've got the group special. We've got two that we can send up on the same, two different, but that has to have a different form too, so it's easier too. But it's gotten to that point on that. So it's a big issue. I talked to them as well. They have had conversations with FedEx, and it's not the fact necessarily because of the anthrax. They said it's the cost, because DOT has 2 different certificates that are required, very stringent, and they're requiring training. They were saying that just for FedEx to get all their staff and get permits would be another $35 to $45 million. Now, are they going to ship enough select agents to be able to justify that and recoup the cost? That's one of the keys. There's also one airline left that will take it, and that's Delta. The other airlines will take it.
that's another reason why we went out to Salt Lake City. We do have build out of Denver, but again, we didn't have a road curve that was approved by the DOT to do that final packaging inspection before it goes. It's very stringent. So that's what we're up against right now. But at least for the cases of if anything comes to us, it's a diagnostic specimen. And our out is that before it is confirmed, if we think we might have something, it's pretty good chance it is, but we haven't confirmed it, we can split the specimen and send it out as a diagnostic specimen. That's acceptable. And it gets there, and then at that point, we can do it. So there are opportunities, but you don't always know. I mean, on the tularemia, we can get it in one day and have it confirmed if it's already an isolate. So it's a real problem there. What's some of the things we have? The other question is, what is a suspected and unidentified select agent? Believe me, the lawyers at the select agent program really love to go over this every time we do it. A suspected one is one that's a diagnostic specimen, basically. You may have it, but you haven't performed the recognized confirmation test that the LRN specifies to do it. Once you have, it's considered an identified, or what we also would say is a confirmed select agent. It's confirmed by the LRN, but the select agent program calls it identified. At that point, that's a select agent. And for us, by us electing not to be a tier 1, we cannot accept any identified select agents into our engine. And the same, we can send them out, but we have to have approved form to do that. So we have two options. We either can hold it for a while till we ship it, or we destroy it. And basically, if it's an interesting one, before college will notify them, we'll get a form and we'll ship it out. Otherwise, everything else is left over, we destroy it all and we get it out. But that's one of the things. So for people that are worried about getting things to reference laboratories, you can still do that as long as you haven't, it has not been identified or confirmed. I think we've already talked about how stringent the DOT requirements are getting. I haven't seen them all, but I guess that's been one of the big changes, and that's what's really impacting our shippers. The available training, you can get that online. Like I said, CDC does offer. That's how we got ours this last year. Peter and I and some of the other folks. You can go to their website on cdc.gov, and it'll list the different training. You can do the pack and ship. Again, anybody that might be working with anything that would be a category A, if you want to keep out of trouble with the DOT and be in compliance, suggest you get it. And once you do that, that has to be renewed every 3 years. You have to go back and take the test, pass it, take the course, pass it as a refresher. So what are some of the trainings we're seeing, or I'm seeing when I get these things called out? One of the things is we do workshops, but we got a lot of staff turnover. We see it in our own labs, we see it out in any lab. Or you may have labs that are people that are working part of a laboratory group or a hospital group, and they rotate between different hospitals. We have new methods coming in all the time. You want to be sure that these people are trained on any updates. We did our select agent program, we had our inspection, they had a new little last comment that they want us to put online, so we have to put that in and document that as well. But you need to keep that refreshed with people. The new regulations, and boy, we know that with the DOT, we'll probably see more coming down the line here. The emerging diseases. 2 or 3 years ago, we hadn't had until last year, we had like one case of human plague in about 5 or 6 years. And I hate to see what's going to be like at the end of the year, because I think we're going to do a lot more before this is over. And who would have thought 5 years ago about Ebola or MERS or some of these old ones re-emerging to the level they have? Again, depending on conditions, people that are exposures, those are different things. But it's important to have, therefore, refresher training, at least an annual, and that you document that. And that you have the people, and not only do you document it, but then you test the competency and record that the people that you train really know to do that, and you observe them. You determine and you communicate those needs during your risk assessment by an observation of what's going on in your laboratories, and just kind of say, if you get one of these where they've been exposure, I'd say they probably need a review of some of the basic safety training. And appropriate training resources. You may have them with your own facility. As a state, we have our own. We're going to be developing more. We also have those at the federal level. Now, as an example, as a reference laboratory, what we'll do for general specimens and not just select agents, we will accept diagnostic specimens, properly packaged specimens meeting the DOT regulations, specimens with the requisition form so we know what the devil it is and who we need to contact, and it needs to be properly labeled too, on not just the tubes and cells, but the packaging again, to meet DOT regulations. We will not accept identified or confirmed select agent specimens or cultures. Anything related to that at that point once it's been confirmed. If we get confirmation on a rabbit, let's say, from a piece of liver they send us, let's send us a swing for it. Nope. We know that animal has it, we can't take it in. And we won't take anything without requisition forms or some means of identifying it. It just doesn't make any sense, because how can we test it and how can we be assured that the right result's going to go back? Some of the resources we have at the state laboratory, Peter and I, and we have several people, specialists that are doing testing like Hugh McGuire for the molecular. We can be consulted by phone and email. I have Peter and my contact information. Also have cards at the back if you're interested in that as well afterwards. We do workshops. We do wet workshops usually a couple times a year. We're looking forward to do some this fall. Not only just is because of Sentinel Laboratory, but a lot of those techniques on how to use your biosafety cabinet, how to do your PPE, some of the things that you need to do are included. So it's not just select agent, you can expand that application to other things. We can do on-site visits. We do road trips to different parts of the state. If they can't get over here because we know some labs are smaller, we will go out and do the training, take the same thing and do it on a road trip. We can do other state and federal resources. Our epidemiologists may have some information. The CDC will have that. And Peter, our biosafety officer, is serving as our laboratory point of contact for laboratory safety and training. Now, he's going to be able to talk about that a little bit at the end here. And I'm, as a BTCT coordinator, I have to do safety, specifically select agents, but it definitely, goes to a level of safety on it, a higher level. Again, the CDC site, go to cdc.gov. It has a lot of the information and protocols on that. You can also set up to get the online training course for the pack and ship for category A. And of course, our favorite BMBL 5th edition. Now, I brought that today, and it's got all sorts of interesting things in it, and they're probably due to have it before long. But nice heavy piece of book, but you can get it all for free online as well. And you can actually scroll down to the section that you want. It is agent-specific. In other words, if I'm working with salmonella today, I can see the agent-specific information for both risk of the agent itself, how to work with it, if you have an exposure, how to deal with it. So very valuable. And that's what the Select Agent Program CDC relies on while they put it out. Again, this is our contact information. Peter Davis, who was just recently selected as our biosafety officer for our laboratory. He's going to be working not only with our own staff, but working with our outreach as we determine more training. Currently, we have training for select agents, we do through our workshops, and we can do that for newborn screening as well in services. But we have a broader look that we want to take on that. I'll let Peter kind of go over that as well. Again, anything with select agents or biosecurity or what we run into, again, I have a lot of information. I talked to CDC and select agent, FBI, and other groups that I have to deal with, so I can certainly help you out on some of things. And I'd like to introduce you to Peter Davis, our biosafety officer. We have the Public Health Emergency Preparedness Grant that you've probably heard about that's been set up. Part of that was to be able to, other than just have a title person, we actually have a person who can devote more of our time for not only our lab in the state. So let Peter, if you'd like to go over some of the program.
As Larry just said, what I'm going to be doing is be a point of contact for anything that you might think of.
Oh, okay, sure. Thanks.
So pretty much everything I'm going to say is something that Larry's pretty much already said, but straight from the horse's mouth. I'm going to be a point of contact for you guys to compose, compile, direct any sort of training that you guys might need in regards to biosafety. Anything that I might not know, I'll pull Larry. I have other resources. He mentioned Dr. Hugh McGuire. I go to Dr. Hugh McGuire a lot. Also Dr. Emily Travanti as well. They've always been very helpful to me. So I'm gonna pass around something here. It's the CLF contact information. It's just kind of me building up my contact list again. the contact list that we used to have kind of got a little old and stagnant, so not many of those people are there anymore. But I'm going to be on the road, going out there, probably within the next year. The first year of this grant is primarily me doing stuff within my laboratory, but that doesn't mean that I can't go out there and help you guys and service you guys as well. That's all I got.
If you have any questions, we're more than glad to help. Give us a call. I've got some cards back there too if you want to pick one up before you leave as well. And we want to be a resource. I think it's very important. I think what we're seeing this summer is a good reminder of how important biosafety is within the laboratory. And even with the training we've had in the past, we're still running into these issues with laboratory exposure. So far, I haven't heard of any that actually come down, thank goodness, but you can't be paid on that side. So, any questions?
Can we put your contact information on our webpage?
Sure. And we have an internet site that we put that information on as well, so that's open information. Well, thank you.
Nice leader. Thank you for coming. All right.